Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted in person and as a courtesy via remote means in accordance with applicable law. Please note that while an option for remote attendance and/or participation is being provided as a courtesy to the public and board members, the hearing will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast unless required by law. Viewers can visit https://twice the local scene.media//Duxbury/ formerly PAC TV to watch a video replay of this meeting on Duxbury YouTube. Good evening, everybody. We do have a quorum. There are 4 meeting members present in the room, and Mrs. Sullivan is present via Zoom. How are things in New Jersey, Mrs. Sullivan?
Very well, thank you. We're all surviving. I haven't driven them crazy yet.
All right. We did receive some minutes late this afternoon, but so I, for one, have not had a chance to read them. So we'll pass those on until the next meeting. At this point, we wanted to address a few of the remaining articles that are open that we have not voted. I think the first article for tonight's discussion, Article 4, is that right with Mary and
Sure.
Jeannie? Or is she there? She is. While she's passing out. Before the discussion on this article begins, I make an announcement that I am recusing myself from the discussion and ultimately the vote in the hopes of avoiding the potential of a conflict of interest. I've asked Al Holman, our member, to conduct a discussion, quote unquote, in my absence. So Al, you have the floor.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Mr. Weiler, thank you very much. And what I'd like to do is to begin by asking Jeannie Horn, Human Resources Director, to make a presentation, if you would.
Sure. Jeannie Horn, Human Resources Director for the town of Duxbury. And I am here to present Article 4. The estimated cost for Article 4 for this year is $188,000. The objective for the spending of this of these funds is to maintain the pay structure and deliver equitable compensation based on the town's ability to pay. And then I just want to talk a little bit about the methodology. So this is the second time the town has engaged in a enterprise-wide compensation and classification study. And this committee and the select board and the employees have all received information from GovHR through a prior presentation around that effort. But essentially it included 144 unique job titles within, so there were 108 non-union positions and 36 union positions. And we worked with GovHR on that study. And what we did was we met with employees first. We described what the study's goals were. The employees, every regularly scheduled town employee was included. And so it included our 6 labor organizations, 3 contract employees, actually 4, and our management and non-management provisions in the personnel policies. So employees reviewed their job descriptions, they completed the job analysis questionnaire. Those questionnaires were then reviewed with the employee and their supervisor and department head and human resources. And then the town manager signed off and HR sent all that information over to GovHR so that GovHR could analyze the job analysis questionnaires, we call them JAQs, and apply a point factor system. It's a 9-factor system so that we could identify, in conformance with the Equal Pay Act in the state of Massachusetts, we could identify relatively equal pay for relatively equal work. So that in doing that, we followed our 15 grade system. We've got grades 1 through 15 that includes all of our union and non-union jobs. And we took a look, so basically the last time we had done this was in fiscal year 22, and we implemented in fiscal year 23. So at that time, we had a 10-grade system for our new, for our non-union employees. We transitioned to the 15 grade system. And we also included the recently decertified secretaries and clerks union at that time. So we reevaluated all of the jobs and we reclassified them. And we also took a look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Equal Pay Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and all other applicable federal and state requirements to ensure that we were analyzing the data and classifying the jobs appropriately. And then we reviewed, as I said, the job duties, job descriptions, job analysis questionnaires. And then we made modifications to those as well, because a lot happened in that time frame. The labor market has changed tremendously. We've come out of the pandemic. And we initiated that first study in 2020. So this study gave us an opportunity to also evaluate some potentially new positions so that they could be considered as part of the compensation classification study too. So that's why there's more jobs included this time around. So as a result, we reclassified 17 job titles. And the next step in terms of order of operation is to provide pay within the pay range for each grade. So that means that, so the goal of the study was to examine internal equity and external equity. So internally, we did the classification part. That's what I described before with the job description. Externally, we did benchmarking against our 18 competitive set communities. So that's how we're examining internal and external equity. And then the individual, when people were placed in their pay ranges, we had to ensure that they were paid within the range. That was the goal of the study, was to make sure that employees, each job was paid within the pay range for that grade. So that the goal was not to achieve market rate. The goal was to identify what the 60th percentile salary range is for our competitive set communities. And then we aged that data so that we could use it in fiscal year 26. So we re-benchmarked our competitive set communities to determine what they anticipated paying their labor force in fiscal year 26, and the average was 2%. So we applied 2% to the 60th percentile survey data, and then we ensured that everybody was paid within the range. So then the next step of that was to identify what it would cost to provide a 3% general increase. So we added 2% to the bottom of the pay range, 2% to the top of the pay range, and then 2% to everyone's fiscal year 25 pay. And then we were able to estimate what that cost would be, and that's part of what I'm asking for. We are recommending no merit pool this year in light of our financial condition at this time. And we still wanted to provide a 2% increase so that we could keep pace with the market and continue to attract and retain employees. And we provided a one-time years of service adjustment for employees below the midpoint for their pay range. And so what you see here is a 1%, a 2%, and a 4%. And those percentages are determined by examining the individual pay for everyone who is below the midpoint of the pay range. So if individuals have 7 or more years of service and they're still below the midpoint of the pay range, there's a calculation that I do that estimates, assuming like 20 years in a pay range, it calculates where people ideally could be in a perfect world. And then the percentage change for those years of service is reflective of how much movement those individuals need to make within the pay range in order to be more reflective of the years of service in that pay range. Non-union employees do not have steps in Duxbury, whereas our union employees do. So there's a much more certain path for union employees to move through the pay range. And someone might say, well, people should be moving through the pay range with meritorious pay and performance, and that is true. But it wasn't until recently that we were only providing merit pay up until recently. And the merit pay isn't enough to move people through the range. So it's not a significant amount of percentage change year over year in order to get that movement through the range. And if individuals were not performing in their job, that performance is handled separately and addressed. So, in effect, people who are still in the town's employ are performing well in their jobs, or else it would have been handled separately.
Can I just clarify, at one point you said 3%, but I just wanted to correct it and just make sure it's 2%.
2%.
Understood that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Edie, if you could, you've got a total estimated cost of $188,000 without making it crazy. Can you give us some idea of the components that make up that $188,000?
I figured that question would be asked. So the adjustments to the pay range minimum, so to ensure, so they're at when you reclassify positions, if they go from, a lower grade to a higher grade, not in cases where they don't then have pay that's within the range, we have to make an adjustment to their pay to make sure that they get to the minimum of the range. So so the cost to ensure that everyone is at least at the minimum of the pay range for their grade is $35,407. And the cost of the 2% general increase is $131,103. And the adjustments based on years of service in position, not years of service to the town. It's the years of service that they've been in the position in Duxbury, is $15,828. And then the remaining $5,000 is earmarked for tuition reimbursement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just for a point of clarification, Jeannie and I had talked about that tuition reimbursement. It's more of an expense, and not really, when you think about it, related to funding of salaries under Article 4. So for next year's budget, not the FY26 budget, but in the following cycle, what we'll be doing is moving that into the HR department as an expense line. Does that make sense?
We'll still use the personnel policies language to provide that to them.
To provide the program, but the funding of it should be a line item within a department, the HR department's budget.
So Sean and Matt, any questions?
Yes. Can you explain the move from a 10 grade to a 15 grade?
Yes, so the 10 grade classification or compensation system was just for non-union employees. So when we examined all of the positions in town, it expanded the number of grades that we needed. So, we went from just the personnel policies, which was grades 1 through 10, to including the DPW, the fire, police, library, dispatch, and lieutenant's contract. So, we had more positions, and it's important to understand. So what's nice, not many communities do a classification and compensation study the way that we have. They instead try and manage their compensation in silos under all those collective bargaining contracts. But it's important to consolidate it so that we can understand how all the pay interacts and to address pay compression and equity across our organization. So that's why, just by the sheer number of positions, we ended up with 15 grades.
Okay.
And further in the classification and compensation study, those grades are determined through a system where in order to further ensure that there is enough, that we don't have pay compression, there's a system where the grades are.
It wasn't based on just the number of positions, it was the responsibilities and complexities of each position that necessitated a wider spread.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I'm trying to find here. The page that illustrates the spread. So the spread. There is a. Here it is. Apologies. So for grades 1 through 5, so it's separated into grades 1 through 5 are classified as administrative and technical. So there's 5% between each grade and there's a 35% range spread. So that creates the ranges. And then for grades 6 through 11, those are our managers, supervisors, and advanced technical position, so there's 5% between each grade, and again, 35% range spread. And then for our directors and senior leadership, there's 12% between each grade and a 35% range spread for grades 12, 13, 14, and 15. So they are established. So that's how they're categorized and grouped after the job analysis questionnaire assigns them a grade, they're grouped further by grade to create those 3 categories.
Thank you. And then just a question about the one-time year of service adjustment. Am I interpreting one time to be this will not happen next year?
Ideally, so we say one time because that means that we're not obligated to provide it another time. So it's not precedent setting, for example. But we also make changes incrementally so that we can make them more affordable. So this is the crux of the unionization of our non-union employees in 2006 and 7. So the issue that occurred before I arrived in Duxbury is that our non-union employees were stalling in the first half of the pay range. Because there was not enough compensation mechanism to move them through the range. So we had people with 20 years of service who had not made it past the midpoint of the pay range. Because the pay ranges that the pay increases that we were providing were not significant enough. And the town was increasing the pay ranges every year by 2% or 3%, but they weren't increasing individual pay in the same amount. So the pay range moved beyond the people. So this is a manual exercise to examine the pay range every year for those people specifically who are below the midpoint. So that they can have a mechanism, so if the merit in the annual increase isn't moving them along, that it becomes more equitable. So people are hired into their positions at all different rates of pay for all different reasons. It's demand, it's what the market will bear, it's the difficulty of finding the individual in the position. So some people are hired closer to the middle of the range when necessary. And then they move beyond that. But then there are other people who have been in the job the entire time they've been here, but they've been here for 15 years. And the market was very different then, so they're stalled. So it's a way to examine pay and make sure that it's distributed in a way that's more meaningful and allows us to retain people.
Yeah, no. Betsy, do you have any questions?
No, did anybody have any questions about back in 08, 07, 08? This is pretty much what there's always the story behind the story, right? And because of what was happening then, and we had all of our department heads and everybody in the personnel plan was seeking to unionize at that point because there didn't seem to be a solve for this issue. And we literally had people that had been here 20 years and were making less than what we could have hired a kid in, somebody that had no experience. So we worked through that, and as a result, promised these folks that we would then be diligent in a couple of respects, that we would be monitoring the marketplace, so that if XYZ job was in the market was worth 50,000, we weren't paying somebody with 10 years experience 40 or 45, and that we would on a regular basis revisit this to make sure that we were aware of what the marketplace was. And it was an attempt to retain employees, because honestly, it costs you more to rehire somebody and train them up and get them going than it is to keep an eye on what's happening in the marketplace and retain good employees that you've had for years. And then, everybody was around the last few years when we did the first market study. We reset as a result of that what the value assigned to each one of these positions. And then over the next couple of years after that, we made the appropriate adjustments, because we had longtime employees that were making less than entry level. And we knew where that was going to go. And we made an adjustment, and now is, to keep our word to these employees, we have then looked at doing this again and making sure that we're current. And if anybody else has any questions, I lived through all of it, so.
Well, I think this is very helpful context, particularly for newer members of the finance committee like myself, so that's very helpful. I do have a couple of additional questions to either Mary or Rainey, which is, when do you expect to have this before the select board?
The 24th. And they typically go with your vote. They have expressed their preference that the finance committee vote on things first over the last couple of years.
If there are no additional questions,
Al,
Mary, go ahead.
If I could just sort of explain something, because there's been some brief conversation regarding Article 4 and how it relates to Article 5A and 5B,
Right.
not necessarily within this board, but in conversations with the select board. And so I want to just try to take a minute to explain that a little bit further, so that there are no questions here. And we will, of course, have this conversation with the select board as well. But the select board has asked the question a couple of times on whether Article 4 is included in 5A or 5B. And every time I tried to answer the question the way it was phrased, I always said, if I understand your question correctly. And so I'm had been attempting to try to answer the question, but here's the situation. Article 5A that is going to be presented is our omnibus budget. And included in Article 5A is the advancement of any employee who's a union employee who is working their way through the step schedule that Jean talked about. So if we have union employees who last year were on a grade 2, step 1, Next year, they will be moving to a grade 2, step 2. And with that is additional compensation for that step. That is included, those steps are included in the 5A budget. But any further adjustment to compensation in the form of a COLA increase is not included in that 5A budget. And that is it because those increases need to be voted by town meeting under either Article 4 or the ratification of collective bargaining agreements.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, there's no overlap between what Jeannie is presenting tonight and 5A, Article 5, correct?
That is correct. So what Jeannie's presenting tonight is the additional funding to, how do you describe it? Age the data and apply the COLA. That always gets voted separately under Article 4 because it needs town meeting authorization before it can be applied to those individual department budgets and the positions within those budgets.
I'd like
Does
to
that
make,
make sense?
yes, it does. I'd like to make the following observation. What's very interesting about this presentation, what Jeannie went through, is that this is a management mechanism that actually is very positive for the town because it takes those stalled individuals with some overview. So I would say that this is a great management tool and a great presentation. Because what it does for me is it gets the lethargy out of the process. And what Mrs. Sullivan just went through, which was education for me and perhaps for others that are on this committee, is to give us some background. And what you've done is to forestall that problem from reoccurring. So this is good, and I definitely wanted to make the point of recognizing that. Now, to get back on with the article, if anybody would like to make a motion on the articles, I'd be happy to entertain.
Al, could I just say one other thing before we do this, just to put some other conversations that I've heard in the community to rest? There has been some conversation about different positions that we have in this Article 4 and in the personnel plan, and about the compensation that different people receive. The compensations that individuals receive, department heads or whatever, were assigned, their job was assigned a value of X to X. And within that value was, a guideline for years of compensation, good reviews, etc. Nobody was getting a raise based on the fact that they breathed air for another year. And we made a promise. It was the compensation study was authorized by the select board. It was voted by town meeting, and these jobs were designated as being had a pay scale of X to Y. And when I've heard some disturbing conversations about why would so-and-so be earning this or that, it's because that's what we published and voted and supported as what that job was worth to the community. And maybe people don't understand that. And obviously seeing this article and seeing what the compensations are for those jobs might be helpful for folks so that they can understand that we did do a big revision a few years ago, but this was what town meeting said was a value to the community for these positions. And that is exactly what these folks are earning. Just, sorry, I'm pontificating here, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Well, I think that's very helpful. The motion?
I'll move to approve Article 4, funding of salaries in the amount of $188,000.
Second. Is there a second?
Sorry.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Roll call. Sean,
Sean, aye.
Nat,
Nat, aye.
Betsy,
Aye.
Al, aye.
Friend abstain. Thank you, Al. Good job.
Thank you, Norm.
And moving along with the evening's agenda. Thank you very much, Jeannie, for your good presentation.
You're welcome.
And your comments, Mary, as usual, very helpful. I'm gonna start the meeting by just giving a couple of second tip of the hat to last night's public forum. I thought it was very well done. There were 45 to 50 citizens there. Probably close to 20, if not all the department heads, a good representation. Fernando Guitar did a wonderful job with the slide presentation. I thought it was well thought out. Mary, I'm sure, had a lot of input on it. But he did a very good job presenting it, answering some interesting questions, trying to make what can be to a layperson a complicated process, hopefully a little clearer. There was probably another 45 minutes of Q&A. And the meeting adjourned around 8 o'clock. So I think it went over well, and hopefully a lot more people tuned in than were there. And I hope we're getting the much needed message out to the citizens of Duxbury about what we're up to and what we're trying to accomplish. So having said that, I think the other piece of business tonight that is focused on is Article 7, the small equipment
I'm sorry.
and
can I-
minor services article.
Can I
Pardon?
interrupt? Mr. Glennon has raised his hand.
What was that?
Mr.
Brian.
Glennon has raised his hand, so.
Oh. Brian, would you like to say something?
He's joining right now.
I see your picture.
Can you hear me okay?
Now we can, yes.
All right, thank you. The system kicked me out and I had to log back in real quick. Thanks. Before we move on, and I appreciate, Jeannie, your explanation on Article 4. I just had a question. I know FinCom's already voted, but this might be helpful to others. Planning Director, I appreciate that that's gone from a grade 12 to a grade 13. I just have a question about hiring in that position where it is open. Can you share a bit without, sharing anything that we can't say publicly, but I'd be curious to know how we would now go about advertising and marketing that position under the new grade, because if I'm somebody on the MMA website, for example, and I'm looking and say, geez, Duxbury, a place I've always wanted to work, this is great. Do we share the whole range, or how do you do that now to attract more folks, given that we've had a vacancy for some time?
Great question. Actually, the Assistant HR Director and I were talking about this the other day because she asked the same thing. So I believe effective this fall, there's a related Equal Pay Act law. So I forget what it's called, but we're now the state of Massachusetts is requiring every employer to advertise the entire pay range for grades. So we're in a really good place because we have just we have renewed our pay ranges, and that tends to be our practice anyway. So my recommendation would be to wait until after town meeting to see what the voters decide as it relates to Article 4. And then assuming if the voters approve Article 4, then we can refresh all the advertising for all of our positions that are under Article 4 with the new pay ranges that are effective July 1st. So we could, we could potentially hire a new planner, but we wouldn't be able to pay the new planner that new pay range until after July 1st.
Understood. Okay, that's very helpful.
We could still, hire them they would still be within the range, but we could
Right.
just earmark that pay range to say that it's effective July 1st.
Got it. Thank you. And friend, I endorse your comment 100% on last night, and note that there's a number of folks in that room right now who played an integral part, and I want to thank them as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, I did not mean to ignore Rainey. I think you did a fine job too.
Oh, thanks.
Particularly your closing comments, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, back to Article 7. We were sent the package electronically. Betsy, Did you receive the email earlier today regarding the
Yes, I have it.
of our, as we call them, the small ticket items under the small cap equipment? Affectionately referred to as capital light? And she did get it. So if you would like to work down the list with us, Mary?
So you have, let me just get here, you have a total of 7 items being presented before you. Items 1 through 6 are general fund related items for the most part, and then there is one for the water enterprise account. So we'll just start at the top, and the first one is for the facilities department. It's for $19,200, and it is to repair the exterior finish at the crematory. The repairs include replacing some damaged wood on the exterior, thoroughly cleaning and applying a fresh coat of stain to protect the facade. And if you've been over to that facility, I think some of you may have seen that has not been done. It does need to have some repairs and maintenance done to it.
And it's a one particular unit within the town that does generate revenue for us, so it's important that.
It is, and also more importantly, there are families who are there with their loved ones, and we want to make sure that we're providing a space that is appropriate for that, so for that service. The second item is for the school department. It still falls under the facilities because our facilities director will be overseeing and spearheading the project, but it relates to what we're calling district-wide asbestos abatement. So our facilities director has put in a request. This will be an annual request for the next several years. And she will be tackling this particular issue in segments. So this request is for $20,000. Remediate asbestos in floor and ceiling tiles. And the first project will be to address some areas within the Alden and Chandler schools. And this is a requirement that is now a compliance and safety issue for our facilities director to implement throughout our buildings. The third item is for the conservation department. It is a request for $20,000 for an aquatic treatment at the lower Chandler Mill Pond. I believe we had the conservation agent in a few weeks ago, and she presented this particular issue. This is a treatment that is done approximately every 5 to 6 years. It is,
We split this with Pembroke,
it is a
right?
pond that is shared with the town of Pembroke, and we do split it equally. So the total cost of the treatment is $40,000. And the conservation agent has been in touch with the town of Pembroke to ensure that they are able to appropriate their share for this to take place. Okay. Item number 4 is for the harbor master. So back at the annual town meeting of last year of 2024, there was an article under capital for about $73,000 for the replacement of the 3 floats down at the waterfront. And at the time, that funding was based on the quote that was received at the time. And since then, as our harbor master went to initiate this project, the quotes were outdated and revised by our vendors, and based on the quotes that our harbor master has received, in order for him to undertake this project and complete it, he needs an additional $16,000 of funding to replace those floats down at the harbor. That would be funded through the Waterways Improvement Fund. The 5th one is what is called duty gear and life-saving equipment for the police station in the amount, for the police department, in the amount of $21,385. This includes 4 AED devices, 2 new handheld radar units, and 35 tourniquet carrier pouches, which are items that are attached to the uniforms of all our uniformed officers. So it's a variety of duty gear and life-saving equipment that they are requesting. Item number 6 is a mower for our lands and natural resources. Oh, I have a typo there. Oop, there's a typo in the, I forgot the R in natural. Oops, my bad. A mower for the Lands and Natural Resources Department in the amount of $20,385.38. This is a mower that is used extensively by the Lands and Natural Resources Department to maintain our properties. This would be replacing an existing 2014 mower that has gone past its useful life. Sure. 10 or 11 years. And then the last item would be for the Water Enterprise Fund funded with water retained earnings, and it is for chlorine analyzers. These are devices that are used in water treatment and distribution systems to test for the levels of chlorine in our water supply and be able to react to any, levels that are either above or below the allowable parts per whatever they are in the water system. I'm not the water superintendent, but it's a necessary component with the 3 devices as well as their related parts, including filters and other components, for a total of $10,785, which then makes the entire article in its entirety to be funded $127,755.38.
Thank you, Mary. For the record, this is probably the second, not third time we've gone through these items, so we're pretty familiar with them. I don't have any questions on the list. Does anybody else in here have any questions?
I do not.
Betsy, any issues with the capital light? That's a no. Our last meeting when we voted budget 5B, in order to deal with the roll call vote that's necessary, we moved and seconded each line item and then waited till the end to call for the vote. So I'd like to employ that same technique here. And I'd like Al, if you would be willing to move, and Nate, if you could second, just so it's consistent for the record. If you could go down the list, Al, and hand them off, and then at the end of the day, we'll call for a vote.
First segment is facilities, line 1, repair exterior finish at cemetery, $19,200. Line 2, school district-wide asbestos abatement, $20,000. Conservation. Next section, line 3, lower Chandler Mill Pond weed treatment, $20,000. Line, next section, Harbor Master Line 4, main float, additional funding needed to complete, $16,000. Next section, police, line 5, duty gear, life-saving equipment, $21,385. Next, lands and natural resources, line 6, SCAD zero turn riding mower, $20,385.38, for a subtotal for non-enterprise funds of $116,970.38. Is there a second?
Second.
We'll take a vote at this point, and as roll call, we'll start with our guest on the television. Betsy,
Aye.
Brendan, aye.
Al, aye.
Nat, aye.
Sean, aye.
That's 5-0-0. Next,
Next section is water enterprise, line 7, chlorine analyzers, $10,785. Total water enterprise, $10,785.
Second.
call for roll. Any questions, first of all? None appearing, roll call vote. Mrs. Sullivan,
Aye.
Friend, aye.
Al, aye.
Nat, aye.
Sean, aye.
5-0-0. Thank you. Now, as far as tonight goes, is there any other articles or issues that we could address?
I think we're all done with the annual town meeting, because we're still waiting on the planning board for.
Checkerberry.
Bill.
And then,
We're still waiting on the planning board for that?
yeah, for Checkerberry, the board will have the select board will have the information on the 24th. Did you want to declare a climate emergency?
Say again?
Did you want to declare a climate emergency? That's Article 24.
Well, we had some, did the Board of Selectmen weigh in on that? Because
Not yet.
Brian had some
Not yet. They will.
hesitation.
They will on the 24th.
I think I shared some of his reserves regarding the implications of what it imposed on the board going forward. I don't know how others feel about it.
I prefer to wait because I think at our last meeting, we discussed the possibility of getting some additional information, feedback. That would be my preferences to this,
That's fine.
because I don't understand it.
That's okay. Did you guys vote on Article 6, by the way? Which is the capital budget?
Yes, they did. We voted on that January 28th.
Oh, they did, okay.
With the exception of two items that were on hold and, which are the FY 26 district technology and the
Yeah.
Candler loading dock.
Okay.
And fiscal advisory is actually meeting down the hall right now to revote those issues.
Okay,
Um,
I thought they had, I just didn't note it in here, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the other question I had, did you folks vote? I know you did the CPC, but did you do the tennis courts also?
You gotta
They,
speak up.
they
Oh,
did
sorry.
not, I
Okay.
can, they did not because the tennis courts were moved to the special.
Special, yeah.
And they wanted to wait to see the special warrant.
Fair enough,
So with that being said.
which I have.
Yeah, so Reedy did email that out today and we have printed copies for you guys to take a look at. I would ask that we put that on for the agenda for next week is to work on the special town meeting articles. As I'm still going through some details, with the Department of Revenue before we go ahead and vote a number of those other articles.
Fair enough.
Fine with me.
Great.
That's it then. That's all I got.
So if I could just sort of address one thing, and I probably should have done it when you were talking about the meeting last night. And I too would like to publicly thank Fernando for the level of effort that he has been putting into his educational efforts on behalf of the community. He's been doing a fantastic job, and I think that folks are probably perhaps learning some information about how their tax bills are calculated that they may not have been aware of. It's not, a topic of conversation that comes up at the dinner table too frequently. However, one of the things that I do want to sort of talk with you guys about, and I think it needs to be, part of our conversation is we know that we are asking a lot of the community with respect to an override. And we also know that we have spent a great deal of time with the task force over the spring and the course of the summer to look at a 5-year forecast with the expectation that, we will manage our finances with austerity during this period of this 5-year sustainable forecast. But what it means is that, should the override be supported and address the fiscal condition that we're in today, it does not mean that we are in a period of status quo. And in fact, it means quite the opposite, that we need to come together in various ways with various groups of folks to really continue to take a deep dive into our budget, to find areas where we are able to gain some additional efficiencies. I know we've talked about this a lot, and we know that our departments have been for years managing their operations with limited funding. And we want to make sure that over the course of the next 5 years, we are taking every opportunity to really take a deep dive again into every budget and look and see where we may need to incorporate some additional reductions in order to continue to make sure that we are building sustainable budgets year over year. And so I want to make sure that the community understands that we've still got a lot of work to do, with respect to the long-term future of the financial condition of this community.
Yeah, it's gonna take an awful lot, Mary, for us to change the dynamic of what's going on with revenue and expense.
Correct.
We have to really think a lot about community, and we know pretty much how we got where we are. We've sort of built the town the way we want it to look and to feel. And we have to decide whether we can afford to continue to do that. Either we can and we will, and we're willing to pay the price, or we can't and we won't, and we're gonna have to change things. And we won't quite be the town that we've been. So, yeah, there's a lot coming up, and I hope the voters can be sensitive to the fact that the vote that's coming up at town meeting at the election shouldn't be held hostage to trying to make some of those very difficult decisions. That we need to be proactive now to keep the town in balance and moving forward.
Mhm.
With a commitment that we know we want to do a lot more work. And try to avoid this down the road. We don't have a lot of time, but if this is approved, budget 5B, it does give us some room for a few years to focus on some of these other problems and see if we can get that margin to spread in our favor for a change.
And to engage the community, in those decision-making processes, you know, where it's going to require some behavior changes, so.
Right.
Yeah, I
We
think,
can't do business as usual.
exactly.
Anybody else have any questions for tonight, issues? Betsy, anything you want to bring up?
No, I think we covered it. I think we're close to, getting through all of our deliberations for the articles. We just have to go through the special town meeting when those numbers are available or firmed up, which should just be one extra meeting. So, we're in good shape, I think, as far as getting our what we feel or our votes out to the community. We've got another meeting on the 24th, or Mary, is that correct? Back at the high school in the same
26th.
theater. 26th, I apologize, the 26th. So folks that didn't make it last night can go in a couple of weeks after school vacation. I know that there's probably other forms that I'm, not mindful of right now. And again, if there's questions from the community, we're all anxious to provide the data and the facts. And Mary has done an amazing job. If you go on to, Mary, is it under finance director, or is all of what you've added as far as backup data to any of the different line items, that's all just under the Prop 2.5, the override tab?
So, no, it's not just under there. So there are documents that have been added to the finance department page. So documents that are
Okay.
information specific that, talk about historical perspectives on, whether it's our bond ratings or OPEB valuations or, local receipts, historical analysis. Those are on the finance department page. All
Okay.
documents to the override, whether it's slide decks or FAQs or handouts from the forum or Rainey's remarks and budget presentations. Those are all on the override page, as well as on the finance page. So between the override page and the finance page, folks should be able to find information. And then this year I've restructured the finance committee pages as well, to have not only a link to the agendas, but also a link to all of the recorded meetings. And in the cases where departments had provided presentations, I've included their slide decks as well, associated with the individual meetings where they presented. So there's plenty of information out there for folks to educate themselves, to hear directly from the department heads as they presented to you, and to hopefully answer some of their questions. But should any questions remain, we do have the educational forum on the 26th where we'd be happy to answer those.
Now,
Great.
I know we mentioned tonight that we have a few unvoted items. Are we scheduled for meetings Tuesday and Thursday next week?
Yes.
So we are scheduled. We don't have enough, I don't think, for 2 meetings.
No, I think what
Now,
should
you
be,
need some time to go over the free cash so we can look at the special. You need a week?
I will know more after I've had a conversation with the Department of Revenue tomorrow, so I will be in touch with you folks.
So would it make sense for us to just schedule one meeting next week on Thursday? Betsy, what do you think?
It's up to Mary, whatever, she has been working incredible hours, helping us with this override and everything else. So I just as soon,
You know what?
adjust to her schedule if I could.
I just realized Monday's a holiday.
Right.
So Thursday may be better because I have a meeting with DOR tomorrow, but they may, if they have to get back to me, Monday's not an option.
Maybe Tuesday.
Yeah,
Great.
so-
So we'll meet on the, Linda, could you cancel our meeting on the 18th and just add special town meeting to make sure that's on the agenda for the 20th,
Thursday.
Yes.
Thursday, the 20th.
For the year.
Yes.
Personally.
Is that all right? With
And I
everybody?
think wandering members will be back by then, which will help.
I know, Mary, you're disappointed we're not gonna meet twice next week, so, you know. I can call you at home, though.
Oh, please. On that note, I think I'll make a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, roll call, Betsy,
Aye.
friend, I,
Yeah,
Yeah, Sean.
meeting adjourned.